This is the Greg Bedard Patriots Podcast with Nick Cattles.
You are listening to the Greg Bedard Patriots Podcast with Nick Cattles, part of the CLNS Media Network. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use code CLNS and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You also want to take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. All right, Greg, couple of draft stories floating around this week. We start with Shedeur Sanders. Now, Shedeur...
hang on. Can I mention one thing? Because this is just on the top of my mind right now.
Sure.
I don't know how you feel. I am so sick of the weather in New England right now. Like it has been brutal. Like as some people know, I coach high school softball. And like later on today, I was just looking. Later on today, we are playing. It is by 6 p.m. By the time the game is over, it is going to feel like 33 degrees outside, consistent wind of 23 miles an hour, gusts up to like 40 miles an hour. Like it's brutal. I mean, it's bad enough for me. I mean, you should see me. I go out there like Nanook of the North with like a winter hat. I have a heated vest underneath the parka. I have heated gloves that I use. And these poor girls have to go out there. Like our poor pitcher, who's a great kid. And we're not one of these teams with like, some dominating D1 pitcher like, a Kelsey Blanchett or Delaney Moquin or any of these girls. And there are some great pitchers in this area that are going D1 and, which is fine. But I mean, it's brutal. And the girls have to hit in this and then they got to go out there and play. Like, oh my God, it has been miserable. And I'm just saying this because I really do not want to go outside this afternoon for this game. Of course I will, but I just had to get that off my chest because I'm really, really sick of the weather this spring. "Quote unquote" spring in New England. It blows.
Greg Cora. Yeah, it has been awful. It's been absolutely brutal. I was talking about this with Kelly the other day. I'm tired of any day that's like, 55 and overcast with a gust or below 50, you get in the 40s. I'm like, what are we doing? Now we have had a couple of really nice days to begin the week, so I don't want to go too crazy. We just had a really nice day on Monday, but the winter was brutally cold for pretty much the entire time. And now we're in the middle of April and we're still dealing with some of these days where it's like, you feel like you're on some kind of episode of Candid Camera for all those people that actually remember that show from years ago. It's outrageous. It's outrageous. What else is outrageous is Shedeur Sanders and the amount of stories about this young man. And what might be happening, what might not be happening for Shedeur. We found out that the Giants had a contingent going out to Colorado to hold a private workout with Shedeur. This is after they had, 13 people. Pete Schrager said on ESPN the other day, 13 people at his pro day. And of course, the Giants are also, your buddy Bert will point this out, they're also looking at Tyler Shuck. They're also looking at Jalen Milroe. So it's not like Shedeur is the only quarterback that's getting this private workout so late in this process. But what do you make, Greg, of the Shedeur Sanders Giants stuff right now?
So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that that the reports have been like this was prearranged, that this was going to happen. It wasn't when it first came out, it was portrayed as some sort of like late movement that, maybe ownership is getting involved and saying like, why don't you go take another look at Shedeur and all that stuff. So, and I'm sure there's a lot of Patriots fans who really, really, really want the Giants to pick Shedeur. That leaves either Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter for the Patriots at 4. I just don't see it that way. And I think that even Joe Shane talked today to the media. It sounds like his comments today, he was asked about if he needs to draft a quarterback, he said we put ourselves in a position where I don't think that's mandatory. About the signing of Wilson and Winston, with the signing of those two players, the mandatory quote, we're happy with the makeup of the room right now. So to me, Nick, I don't know how you feel about it, but unless Mara or Tish as ownership go in there and say, you need to do this, you need to draft him, or else it's your job. I don't think they're drafting Shedeur Sanders at 3. Not even close.
There was a long period of time where I just kept saying, 2 quarterbacks are going to go in the top 3 because it's the nature of the sport, it's the nature of the draft, and you've got 2 teams in Cleveland and New York where the front office and coaching staff, their jobs are on the line. And usually that means that a team is going to go grab that quarterback. And most of the time that means that team is going to reach for that quarterback. But it does feel like over the past couple of weeks, Hunter and Carter are likely going to be gone in the top 3. But I'm still leaving the door open. I'm not totally closing the door of the idea of Sanders getting drafted in the top 3 because of what I just mentioned. Like I could totally see it play out. I really could. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. There's been so much thrown out there about Sanders. He's become pretty polarizing during this draft process. I don't know if he wanted it that way, if his dad wanted it that way, but here we are. We're about a week away from the draft, and I'm not totally sold that Sanders even knows where he's going to go. So we'll see how it unfolds. But speaking of Abdul Carter, the Patriots and Carter, this is interesting, Greg, because I don't know if you're getting the same things from the people that you speak with, and I know that you said this like a week or 2 ago, maybe even longer than that, about Carter, and there are some questions about his makeup and all of that. It feels like that the people talking about Carter now, there's a lot more of the character stuff popping up, and there's a lot more, hey, this guy might fall, this guy might fall. Do you believe it, A? And B, what could that mean for the Patriots?
Yeah, Nick, I do believe it. The problem with that is, and we heard, Vrabel on basically this very topic earlier, is that his film is so good. I mean, he's so explosive. He's so fast. He's so bendy around the edge. He's so versatile. Like, if I were the Patriots with the way they're constructed right now, if they were to get Abdul Carter, first of all, I would take him. I think he's just that good. And you figure it out. And this is why you have Mike Vrabel and this coaching staff. Now, would I like Abdul Carter with Gerard Mayo and that coaching staff? No. No. I do not think that would be a good mix. But I think it's real. I think, there's a possibility that the Giants pass on him. A slight possibility. I don't subscribe. There's a lot of people out there who are like, well, they traded for Brian Burns, gave him the big contract. They have Kayvon Thibodeau, like all that stuff. First of all, Thibodeau's not even that good. I mean, he's a good prospect, but he also, like, they have to decide on his 5th-year option coming up. I don't even know whether they're going to pick it up.
Yeah.
And, you draft Abdul Carter, like, you forget about it, and you forget about Thibodeau, and, maybe you pick up his 5th-year option, use him as trade incentive, like, blah, 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 something along those lines, or see how it goes. But I think that the character issues are real on Abdul Carter. I just don't know whether they're bad enough to supersede his talent, which is immense, especially in this draft, considering, how I would say, like, really it's a 2-player, like, elite draft with him and Hunter. And then everybody else is sort of, there's a run of, like, below that to, like, 16 or 17 where the guys are in the same ballpark. It depends on your needs. And so, I think Carter's a spectacular prospect, but definitely have to go into that background. I said it before the last podcast or a couple podcasts ago. I mean, it's been going around that, like, this is not, I would say he's not a good dude. and that, people have issues with him. And so we'll have to see whether that plays out and whether, it is the film that supersedes everything. And he's more of a Lawrence Taylor type where, he's that good on Sundays that you put up with what happens during the week. Even guys like Bill Parcells and Bill Belichick put up with it because he was that good.
Yeah. And we'll talk about some of the stuff later on, but you're weighing so many different factors before you draft the young man. And part of it obviously is character. And, is that person going to fit in the room? Who knows how much of it is just immaturity of life? Who knows how much of it is he's got some malicious intent within his core? Who knows why he's, seen this way? There is one obvious situation that played out last March where he got into it with the tow truck driver and dragged the tow truck driver out of the truck and, faced a misdemeanor that happened in March of 2024. So there's one legitimate stated misdemeanor on the record. There might be more, but that's the story that a lot of people look at. And there is the word, we talked about it in a prior podcast. Bob McGinn had the quotes where whoever it is talking to McGinn saying he's not a good guy. He's not a good dude. There's, he's an excellent player. So you got to weigh that. And Vrabel, talked about Carter's tape, and we'll talk about that a little bit later and get into some more specifics about Carter on the field. But you got to weigh the pros and cons with everybody. So we'll see. Speaking of pros and cons, a lot of pros with Will Campbell recently, Greg. And I was looking at this just the other day about how many analysts and pundits are in favor of Campbell at tackle and what people are saying. And you actually pulled some quotes. Let's go through them quickly here one by one. Bucky Brooks loves himself some Will Campbell. He called Campbell the crown jewel of the class.
Yeah. I don't disagree with Bucky. I mean, I just look at all the guys and look, Membu's talented. I like Kelvin Banks. There's a bunch, Josh Simmons is coming off the injury. I think that when you look at all the guys, when you're talking about left tackle in the NFL, I think that he's the cleanest projection. I mean, maybe it might be Simmons, but he's coming off the patellar injury. You don't know how he's going to react to that. Membu has been a right tackle in college. He has the athletics. He has the length to be a left tackle, but not everybody can make that transition. Kelvin Banks, some really good film, some, rough film. And so, I agree with Bucky. I mean, if I were the Patriots and I wanted to plug a hole, I would feel best about Will Campbell. I think I would be able to sleep well that I know that he's at least going to be league average almost from the get-go, and then we'll see from there.
Todd McShay said that Campbell is one of the cleanest prospects in the entire draft. How much should the cleanliness of a prospect matter, Greg, for the Pats at number 4?
I think it's, Nick, I don't know how you feel about it, but to me, it's sort of like it's a differing scale depending on where you are as a team, where you are as a program. And for the Patriots right now, I think, the scale would weigh more heavily towards cleaner prospects, guys that I know who are going to play in this league and be a pro and be a leader and intangible guy, like that sort of thing, than if, say, the Patriots were, 10-7, won a playoff game, they're knocking on the door. That's where the scale sort of goes back to let's look for a difference maker, somebody that's going to put us over the top. So I think right now where the Patriots are, I think the cleanliness of a prospect would be a priority for me. And I think for this Patriots front office.
I just don't want the team to reach out of desperation to draft a guy because they like the guy off the field. You have to draw the line at some point, and it's a balancing act. So at number 4, it's who's left on the board. Like if it's Carter versus Campbell, I'm drafting Carter, even though Carter has the questions we just talked about, and Campbell is the quote unquote clean prospect, because Carter is so talented that he could change the landscape of your defense if things go well with him. So you always have to draw the line and understand that, yes, a clean prospect, we'll get into character a little bit later, it's important, but how do you weigh that versus just the talent in the film? And that's what these guys are doing, and women throughout the league, just watching film over and over and over again and trying to figure out, is it worth the risk to take that guy who has some flaws versus the other guy that we have no problem with the idea of him walking into the room. Daniel Jeremiah of the NFL Network, both of us, I believe, like Daniel Jeremiah. We think he's good at what he does.
Yep.
He said that Will Campbell, I saw this was, I'll just throw this out there. I finished watching it right before jumping on this pod with you, Greg. For any football fan, and all of you are football fans watching right now, and if you're a big draft fan, go out and find Ryan Russillo's podcast with McShay and Jeremiah. I thought it was really good. And I like all three of those guys a lot. So go check that out. It was just released, I think, yesterday. But in that podcast, Greg, Jeremiah says Campbell is probably a reach, but that's not a bad thing in this draft. What's he mean by that?
Yeah, he was asked, and he said, historically, yes, probably in this draft, not for me. Because Campbell is Jeremiah's 10th ranked player. He said, but it's such a screaming need for New England and what they're playing with right now. What he means by that, and I think this is where there's a bit of a disconnect, I think, from what I can sense from Twitter and comments and things like that. There's a disconnect because in their mind, when they talk about an offensive tackle at 4th overall, they, have like Anthony Munoz and Orlando Pace and any, franchise left tackle, like no doubt. Every draft is different. And just because a guy might not be historically, the prototype in a franchise left tackle, you just got to look at the context of that year's draft. And like we said, I mean, pretty much everybody agrees. I mean, unless you need a quarterback in Cam Ward, there's really two sort of, quote unquote, like lottery picks in this draft. And that's Hunter and Abdul Carter. And so what are you going to do? You're going to stomp your feet and not draft somebody that is, next on the board or your highest left tackle just because historically he's not worth the 4th overall pick? I mean, you have to grade it on a curve and, deal with it. I mean, look at, for example, look at Lane Johnson of the Eagles. He was the 4th overall pick in 2013. He has been a career right tackle. And, you could use this with Membu. You could use this with Will Campbell if he has to, kick inside and be an all-pro guard. I mean, if it is drafting a right tackle, with the Eagles fans in 2013 said, well, no, we're not drafting a right tackle at 4th overall. I think Eagles fans think that worked out pretty well. And I said, so you basically have to use it within the context of that year's draft. And I think it's quite obvious to everyone that there isn't a very elite class in this draft. And then it's sort of pick your flavor after that. And I think Campbell's in that category for sure.
You can't create a player. This isn't Madden. You can't go out there and say, okay, boy, there's all these guys with questions at 4. Let's go out and create somebody who doesn't have any questions. You can't do that. You've got to take the draft for what it's worth, and you've got to deal with what you've got in front of you. It's kind of like the opposite of last year, Greg, for context. Like when we talked about the drafts last year, and I've always said drafts are like snowflakes. They're all different. And when you look at last year's draft, we talked about the quarterback class and how many people were screaming, oh, you really think there could be 3 quarterbacks that are good? You really think there are going to be 3 good rookie quarterbacks? Blah, blah, blah. And people were screaming and look at the history. And I went through the history and everybody went through the history of how likely it is to hit on 3 quarterbacks in the same draft. And we had that entire conversation for weeks. And then you look at it. Jaden Daniels was unbelievable. Drake May showed really good flashes. Michael Penix showed some good flashes towards the end of the year with Atlanta. Bo Nix was in the Rookie of the Year conversation. Caleb Williams was part of a disastrous Chicago situation. We'll see what he does with Ben Johnson. But after looking at last year's results, I don't know how many people would be screaming, you really think there's going to actually be 3 quarterbacks that can start in the NFL out of 1 first round? Well, here we are. It looks like you could have 4 or 5, and we haven't even talked about J.J. McCarthy, who got hurt last year and hasn't thrown a football in the NFL for a game that matters. So last year, it was a different kind of draft. This year, you have 1 quarterback that people think is like that legitimate guy, and that's Cam Ward. So everything is different. This year, you just don't have that, deep elite class, so to speak. And for those listening, we ask that you subscribe to the podcast, like and leave a review. And for those watching the show on CLNS, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the Patriots Press Pass YouTube channel, where you can find our show and a lot of other great Patriots content. Also, please make sure to turn on your notifications so you know the instant a new video drops. Back to Mike Vrabel's press conference. Greg, he discussed character an awful lot, my friend. How much do you think character weighs in on what they're going to do next week?
I think a lot. I mean, but I do think that there's a limit. I did think that it was interesting that, first of all, Giardi asked the question, and even before he could get the question out, because Mike said about, you brought in a bunch of high character guys in free agency and good football players. And Vrabel said, and that's really the most important thing. And, then when he answered the question about, will that sort of trend continue into the draft? And this is, just a little inside baseball. This was me and Giardi sort of tag teaming on this question. We had of like minds and how to phrase it, because really we were trying to get at Abdul Carter to see if there was some sort of hint on, how they view a guy like Abdul Carter with those red flags that we talked about. And, he said, you can't win and you can't do what we want to do with just a bunch of good dudes. That's not going to get it done. So, I thought that was really interesting. And to me, that was a comment about Abdul Carter. That sort of like we talked about earlier, that Vrabel and the Patriots, at least at this point, and they could change their minds, with a little bit over a week, 8 days, what have you, before the draft, where I think they've had the conversation that says, if Abdul Carter somehow falls to us, are we okay with that character risk because of the film and how talented he is? And I think the answer is yes.
I thought one of the things that Vrabel said that was really, really good was when he was asked about the lessons he learned from Tennessee and the first round picks that they swung and missed on. Not necessarily the injury stuff. He hit the injury stuff multiple times. It's rather obvious that durability is very high on the list for Mike Vrabel when it comes to trying to draft the future of this organization.
And it could be a tough comment about Josh Simmons in terms of him coming back from that injury.
Absolutely. But this is something I don't think many of us think about consistently, Greg, that Vrabel brought up that I thought was just tremendous. He was talking about the impact that player makes and demands on a first-round pick. And he talked about, just like the quarterback, everybody's going to be talking about the first-round pick from when we pick them for as long as they're here. And he finished that by saying, I think you have to have the attitude and demeanor to handle that. And I thought that was a really good and telling comment. And we don't always look at it from that perspective of this young man's going to get drafted as a top 5 pick in the NFL draft. And there is going to be inherent pressure that guy comes in and he makes an instant impact. So maybe that means if you're stacking up Armand Membu versus Will Campbell and you say they're pretty similar, Membu might have a higher ceiling than Campbell. Campbell's got the higher floor, but you know what? Membu's young. He's raw. There have been some questions at times about how he handles certain things. Do we really want to put that specific guy in the spot at the press conference answering all the questions about being a top 5 pick in the NFL? Because if it's that close, we feel like Will Campbell is going to be up there answering the questions with no problem whatsoever. And it was part of the Drake May conversation we had last year, his swag, his confidence. He never came across as being worried or anxious about being the third pick in the NFL draft. I just thought that was a really, really interesting comment. And you could look at guys like Abdul Carter, and you wonder if he has the attitude and demeanor to handle that kind of responsibility. And you look at guys, like I said, Campbell, Hunter, Jalen Walker, where you feel like those guys can handle it.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. That was a good job by you picking out that comment. And, that in my mind, if I'm the decision maker, and I know there are fans out there because I hear from them on Twitter, and, they're sort of grumpy Gusses in terms of like they only want elite talent and all that stuff, but there's so much more. And like I don't see, if you're a decision maker, if you're Mike Vrabel, the decision maker for the New England Patriots, and you're talking about Will Campbell and Membu at possibly drafting them at 4, and where this team is and the need really for a plug and play left tackle, at least as rookie season, to come in and elevate the room. I don't know how you go with Membu over Campbell for, the reasons that you laid out. And just like, what you're going to get with Campbell. He's not going to crap his pants because he's the 4th overall pick. And if he gives up 3 sacks in a game, like, he's not going to turtle. He's not going to be like, well, I want to move back to right tackle because that's where I've been. Or, maybe I'm more of a guard. Like, this dude is going to handle it. And I think that's a great thing for this team if that's what they ultimately decide to do.
And it doesn't mean that you're always going to be right. You kind of think about Jalen Polk. Jalen Polk drafted in the 2nd round. A lot of people felt at the time, solid pick, reasonable pick. The character mostly checked out for all that we knew. He seemed like a guy who would be able to, walk in and handle certain things. And, Elliot Wolf has said, we put too much on his plate early on. And even somebody who checked a lot of those boxes in Jalen Polk, putting that kind of pressure on him and really looking for him to be, wide receiver 1 to start the season, it fried Polk. And we saw how Polk reacted to that. And we saw how it impacted him. And Polk was, older and more mature and seemingly ready to get into the NFL. So if you're looking at somebody who's 20 years old, 21 years old, you have some questions about their maturity, you throw them in there and go, hey, buddy, you're going to be our starting left tackle. Like, if you're talking about Armand Membu, hey, man, you're young, you're raw. There's some things that have been said about how he's handled certain things. Okay, well, now we're not only going to draft you at 4 overall, but we're also going to try to swing you to the left side. That's a lot to ask of Armand Membu. And if he reacts like Jalen Polk, you just spent the 4th pick on a guy who looks absolutely lost and is a mess. So you got to think about it. Abdul Carter, Vrabel said that Carter's tape is dynamic. How much of Carter have you watched, Greg, and how dynamic is he?
I've watched a decent amount. I mean, I think he is ridiculous. I mean, it is weird when you watch him on film. I remember watching Micah Parsons coming out, and I remember at the time when we were talking about that draft, like I was blown away by Micah Parsons. I was, I talked about him that, if I'm Bill Belichick, I look at him as Lawrence Taylor, and like I would do anything that I can to get that guy. And one of my better evaluations, because that's pretty much come to fruition. But when I see Abdul Carter, I don't know. I know their measurables are pretty close, but Abdul Carter seems smaller to me than Micah Parsons. I don't know why that is. He's a little small. I do wonder how much he wants to defend the run and things like that. There are question marks about him. I personally, if I were the Patriots, if for some reason he fell, and the way they're constituted right now, they got Harold Landry, they got Chase on, they got Keon White, Anthony Jennings, they have all these guys on the edge. If I'm them, I'm probably putting him at weak side linebacker and sort of, using him as a chess piece, blitzing from the second level, or, maybe fire zones where he's exchanging with like Harold Landry drops out, but all of a sudden here comes Abdul Carter. I mean, his film is pretty spectacular, and he's definitely going to make an impact in the NFL. We'll see. Ultimately, is he a 3-down guy like Micah Parsons has developed into, or is he sort of a one-trick pony where he wants to rush the passer and that's it? But yeah, I agree with Vrabel. I mean, I don't know why he said that. I think he was being honest, but I do wonder if maybe he was selling a little bit in case he does fall to the Patriots and the Patriots are interested in trading out.
Vrabel did the presser, obviously. What'd you make of it?
More of the same. Mike is in charge. Mike has the hammer. I also do think, and I don't know if this was, I heard that Holly say this last night on BST or what, but talked about how, Elliot Wolf, when he gets in front of the microphones, first of all, it's not his thing. You could tell he's not comfortable with it. He needs to do it a lot more. And I really like Elliot, but we all have our strengths and weaknesses. And right now, because he hasn't been required to do it, especially like when he was in Green Bay, it was all Ted Thompson. When he was in Cleveland, it was John Dorsey. And then when he got here, it was Bill. So, he's one of these guys where, as opposed, you look at, John Schneider and Elliot Wolf and Alonzo Highsmith and Reggie McKenzie, all these guys were all together in Green Bay. And you just see John Schneider is just one of these guys who's comfortable. And, Elliot is not. And also, Elliot is very honest and sometimes says not the ideal thing. So I think in all respects, I think that Mike Vrabel is the better salesperson for the brand of the Patriots right now. The way he comes off, the way he knows how to not be fooled by the media members and not give up too much information. And then you factor in that he has the hammer and he's the guy. He should be talking for this organization.
Yeah, there's no doubt he's the dude. We've said this from day one. You and I have been consistent. Mm-hmm. Every other team has their GM or president of football operations or whatever up there handling these questions. The Patriots have Mike Vrabel. That tells us all we need to know. As far as offensive tackle, we talked about Campbell. We talked about Membu a little bit here. Vrabel was asked whether or not he felt like there was an offensive tackle that was worthy of the 4th pick in this draft. And I'll just sum up what he had to say with this. He said he thinks there's some starting tackles in this draft. What did you take from that answer?
I took it this way, Nick, and I've heard some people, say that basically equated, and I think this was Holly again, equated it to Bill's Mac Jones comment about where he's like, Mac has the ability to play quarterback in this league. I didn't read it that way. I read it more like I think Vrabel's sort of playing the game. He's playing the PR game in terms of how much information they're letting out. I don't think they want to scream to the rooftops like if they love Will Campbell or they love Membu or whoever they love as an offensive tackle. I don't think they want to scream it. I think they're downplaying their interest in what they might do at that position. And that also might invite somebody to say, we're not sure, we really want Tyler Warren. Could the Patriots go there? If Vrabel says like, oh yeah, we see starting tackles, all over the place, including, remember at the combine, he said like, they think there's good tackles like throughout the draft.
Yeah.
I think he's just playing the game. I don't really read too much into the quote at all.
Neither do I. Tell the fine people about Gametime.
It's playoff season, hockey, basketball. You got to get there. Of course, not for the Bruins because they're not in the playoffs.
Yeah,
but maybe
way to come up with a tie, by the way, and possibly hurt your lottery chances. Good stuff, guys. Good stuff.
Why can't teams around here throw games? And Patriots, Bruins, they can't even lose right. But anyways, you got to get out to the game to really feel it. To be a sports fan, you got to be there in person. And the best time to do that is to go through my people at Gametime. Gametime picks they have curation that makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. Oh yeah, They have tickets for all that stuff. Basically anything you want to go to, they have tickets for you. They have the all-in pricing. Toggling this feature shows you the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. They have the panoramic views from the seat in the app before you buy. That's always a must for me. The lowest price guarantee or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Also, Gametime ticket coverage. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Got to get on there. Check out the Celtics, who are coming up against the Hawks. Is that correct, Nick Kettle?
No, that is not correct. They are playing the.
Damn it!
They're playing the Magic. Game 1 Sunday, 3:30 tip.
The Magic beat the Hawks.
Yes.
So that was that. So yeah, they're playing the Magic starting Sunday at TD Garden. Get on there and check that out. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code CLNS for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime.
And of course, check out BSJ, $50 for the year. Bedard, Giardi tag teaming on the Patriots. And if you want to read about the Celtics, my locked on brother from another mother, John Corrales, is, of course, writing all about the Celtics and their chase to another championship over at BSJ. $50 for the year. And then don't forget about downloading the Prize Picks app. That code is CLNS. Get $50 instantly when you play $5. All right, Greg, there's just a few more things I wanted to ask you about. One of the things that Vrabel brought up during the press conference that stood out to me was positional value. And he mentioned premium positions. We're talking quarterback. We're talking left tackle. We're talking outside corner. We're talking defensive end, edge, pass rusher. We're talking about wide receiver 1, right? Those are the premium positions. So how much do you think the Patriots will put weight on premium position when they're looking at the 4th pick?
A lot. And I think they also might do it in, possibly looking up to trade back into the first round, say, for a wide receiver. I mean, I think the Patriots have done a good job. It's still a process, but I think that they've done a good job. I don't know how you feel about it, of sort of, checking off those positions, adding, talent at premium positions, whether it's Carlton Davis or Harold Landry. They already have Christian Gonzalez. Really, to me, Nick, the last two that they had to check off to be like, all right, well, we have a chance is left tackle and wide receiver 1. And, could both of those happen in this draft? They could. I mean, they would have to knock it out of the park. Again, we've also talked about the possibility of a trade at some point, after the draft, in the summer, what have you, contract negotiation snags, who knows who becomes available, and the Patriots have flexibility. So I think they're making progress. And that's why I do think, Nick, that left tackle is a premium position that, to me, that factors into the 4th pick, at least, if not what they do trading up in the first round or sticking at 38, what have you. I think it absolutely factors in. And that's why I'm sticking with Will Campbell as the 4th pick as of right now.
It's the argument against Ashton Genty. It's the argument against Tyler Warren. Guys who are seeing Genty, you could argue, is the 3rd blue chip prospect in this draft. But the hesitancy with Genty is positional value. And running back is just not seen as a premium position. I know some people are trying to push that narrative after Saquon Barkley was terrific. I'd also say I just checked the Philadelphia Eagles offensive line is terrific as well. Mm-hmm. But you look at positional value. So if you got Will Campbell versus Tyler Warren, Will Campbell fills that positional value, that premium position of left tackle. Tyler Warren is not only a tight end, which is not a very valued position. You're also talking about having Hunter Henry and Austin Hooper on your roster currently. And if you look at Genty, you have Stevenson and Gibson on your roster currently. If you look at left tackle, you've got Vidarian Lowe. So this is just trying to stack up the different aspects of a pick in what you're looking at, which brings me to this, Greg. Something else that Vrabel brought up, positional versatility. And I thought that was interesting in 2 ways. If we go back to the Campbell-Membu conversation that we had a little while ago, Campbell, even though this might make people sick, some people that are listening to this, when we mention the word offensive guard, and I get it. But the argument, if you're Vrabel and you're looking at this and you go, okay, so it's Campbell versus Membu. Well, we feel pretty good that Campbell can play left tackle. We feel pretty good that Membu can play right tackle. But what if plan A fails? What do you got? And positional versatility, you could argue and say, well, at least we know we could kick Campbell inside and we're safe. So that's one thing. The other thing is I thought of Jalen Walker, because if you look at positional versatility, one of the criticisms of Walker is that he's a tweener. Well, Walker can obviously fill a number of different positions defensively for the Patriots, and maybe Vrabel actually looks at that as a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you on that front. I mean, I think that Vrabel likes positional versatility. It lessens, remember, I think the overriding thing in this draft, Nick, for these Patriots and where they are and where this new regime is they cannot afford to screw this up. Like they cannot afford to screw up the fourth pick. Like that guy's got to be a 10-year starter and a pretty damn good one. Who do you feel better about that? I mean, I think that goes to Campbell, like you said, that, we know that he could kick inside if need be. I don't know about Membu. I don't know if Membu can play, left tackle. And, Jalen Walker, a little small, but, positional versatility definitely stands out, and that he can do a bunch of different things. And I think you're right. I think this coaching staff likes that.
All right, let's wrap it up with Joe Milton. Vrabel was asked about Milton, and he said it pretty much came down to Milton was going to be losing reps as time went on. Did you like how Vrabel handled that question?
Bullshit. I mean, I wonder why he was going to see a decrease in reps workload. Maybe it could be because you signed a veteran journeyman quarterback to come in. Because why? Because you didn't like Joe Milton. You didn't like his attitude. You didn't like the cut of his jib. You didn't think he was going to be good in the room. So, don't tell me it's because he was going to get less reps. You made that decision because you didn't want to be in the Joe Milton business. And that was pretty clear to me. I think it's clear to everybody. But yeah, I thought the answer was, a typical Vrabel BS stream, and that's fine. He's got to do what he's got to do, but it just wasn't truthful.
Yeah, he's not going to come out and say, we got rid of him because he thinks he's better than Drake May, and we're not having that. He's not going to say that. All right, he's Greg. I'm Nick. Back later in the week, in like a day or two, to cover more Patriots. I might not be on the next episode. I might be replaced by somebody who is better looking and more well-known. Greg's upgrading, possibly, for the second episode this week. But everybody, until then, be well, and we'll talk soon.